I slammed through the church doors at 3:17 in the afternoon, my gown reeking of antiseptic and crusted with dried blood at the wrist. 20 of his relatives stood like a blockade, pointing fingers and screaming only 2 words, "Get out." But the real horror wasn't their rage. It was seeing my fiancé at the altar, calmly sliding a gold band onto another woman's finger as if I had never existed. My name is Brooke Callahan, 32 years old, and I was supposed to be a bride today. Instead, I was standing in my bathroom, freezing as the pager on the marble counter screamed for attention. The small screen flashed red letters that burned into my retinas, Level 1 trauma or now. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10 in the morning. Then I looked at the vintage lace wedding gown hanging against the doorframe. It looked like a ghost in the harsh light, delicate and demanding. I had 4 hours until the ceremony. I told myself I had time. I grabbed my keys and the pager, ignoring the sinking feeling in my gut that this was not a choice I was making, but a trap I was stepping into. I drove to Morrogate Emergency and Surgical Center with a lead foot, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I reached the nurse's station to sign in, my pen hovered over the paper. My hand froze. My name was already there. It was typed in bold, black ink in the slot for the on-call trauma surgeon, as if it had been planned for weeks. "Sarah," I said, grabbing the charge nurse by the arm. "I am off rotation today. It is my wedding day. Why is my name on the printed roster?" Sarah looked down at her tablet, her face pale and her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I know. Dr. Callahan. But—" The schedule was changed at midnight. The system log says someone used an admin override code to put you on duty. There was no time to argue. The double doors swung open and the paramedics wheeled in a stretcher. The patient was crashing. We scrubbed in. The man on the table was unidentified, a John Doe in a cheap suit who had been T-boned at an intersection. As the nurses cut away his clothes to prep the chest cavity, something clattered to the tiled floor with a metallic ring. Sarah picked it up and held it out to me in a biohazard bag. It was a thick gold wedding band, a man's ring, and stuck to it was a blood-soaked scrap of receipt paper with scrawled handwriting. "Don't trust the groom." I stared at the words. A cold knot tightened in my stomach that had nothing to do with the surgery. I pushed it down. I had a life to save. I repaired the ruptured spleen and stabilized the internal bleeding with mechanical precision. It was brutal work, but I was fast. When I finally stepped back and stripped off my bloody gloves, I checked the wall clock, 12:15. I could still make it if I drove fast. I hit the button to open the scrub room doors. Nothing happened. A red light flashed above the frame. "Code. Red. Lockdown." "Open the door," I shouted at the intercom. "Medical emergency is over." "We can't, doctor," a static-filled voice replied from the security booth. "Security protocol triggered in your sector. We are on hold until clearance." It might take a while. For 40 agonizing minutes, I was a prisoner in my own operating theater. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking with a rage that was beginning to boil over. No service. I dialed Gavin Mercer, my fiancé, over and over. The call failed every time. I typed a text emergency at hospital. Stuck. On my way. It sat there, the status bar never changing to delivered. It was as if the hospital itself had become a Faraday cage designed to keep me silent. When the doors finally hissed open, I did not walk. I sprinted. I ran through the parking lot, tearing the remaining latex from my wrists, feeling the weight of an invisible hand pressing down on my chest. This was not bad luck. Someone had dragged out every second, turned every key, and blocked every signal. I arrived at the church at 3:17. I pulled the wedding dress over my head in the parking lot, not caring that the hem dragged on the asphalt. I ran toward the heavy oak doors of the chapel. They were waiting for me. 20 people. Gavin's mother, Evelyn, stood front and center, flanked by aunts, uncles, and cousins. They formed a human wall, blocking the entrance, their faces twisted into masks of exaggerated disgust. "Get out!" Evelyn shrieked, her voice echoing off the stone facade. "You are late. You humiliated him. You are not fit to be a Mercer." "Let me through." "Evelyn," I said, my voice breathless but lethal. "He deserves better than a woman who chooses strangers over her husband." Another aunt yelled, pointing a finger in my face. I didn't wait for them to move. I shoved past Evelyn and threw my shoulder against the church doors. They burst open with a thunderous boom. The congregation turned. Hundreds of eyes bored into me, but I only looked at the altar. Gavin was standing there in his tuxedo, but he wasn't waiting. He was holding hands with another woman in a pristine white ball gown. She was standing exactly where I was supposed to be standing. She was holding my bouquet, and as I watched, frozen in the doorway with blood drying on my wrist, Gavin slid a ring onto her finger. Looking back, the red flags were not subtle markers buried in the noise of a 4-year romance. They were neon signs, bright and glaring, that I had chosen to ignore because I wanted to be loved more than I wanted to be right. Gavin Mercer was perfect on paper. He was handsome, charming, and came from old money that supposedly signaled stability. But the Gavin I lived with was different from the Gavin the world saw. He was gentle when it was convenient, yet his affection always felt performative. He held my hand tightest when cameras were flashing at charity galas. He kissed my forehead most tenderly when his mother was watching. If there was no audience, there was no show. The entire wedding planning process should have been the final warning. I did not pick the flowers. I did not choose the menu. The Mercer family treated the ceremony like a corporate merger, with Evelyn Mercer, his mother, acting as the CEO. She controlled everything, from the font on the invitations to the seating chart that placed my own parents in the back row. But it was not just the logistics they were obsessed with. It was the paperwork. Specifically, the financial disclosures. They were interested in one thing, and it was not my skill as a trauma surgeon. 3 years ago, I co-invented a post-operative sensor that detects internal hemorrhaging before vital signs crash. The patent is in my name. The licensing fees from hospitals across the country deposit a substantial check into my personal account every single quarter. It was money I never bragged about, but the Mercers knew. They sniffed out liquid assets like sharks scenting blood in the water. I remember a dinner at their estate 6 months ago. Evelyn had smiled at me over her crystal wine glass, her eyes cold and calculating. "Brooke, dear," she had said, her voice dripping with false concern. "We know how demanding your job is, but you must understand that once you are a Mercer, priorities shift. Doctors are busy, but a wife must know how to prioritize the family legacy." I had laughed it off then, thinking she was just being old-fashioned. I was wrong. She was setting the terms of my employment. Then came the pressure from Gavin. For weeks, he had been bringing up a post-nuptial agreement. He never called it a prenup because we were too close to the date, so he framed it as a protective measure for me. "It is just to reduce the pressure on you." "Babe," Gavin had told me one night, massaging my shoulders while I tried to read a medical journal. "My family's estate is complicated. If we sign an asset separation agreement now that kicks in after the vows, the lawyers get off my back. You do not even have to read the boring parts. Trust me. I need to see the original draft." "Gavin," I had replied, "I cannot sign something I have not read." "You hurt me when you act like this," he had whispered, pulling away as if I had slapped him. "It makes me feel like you do not trust me to take care of you." I felt guilty then. Now, I feel nauseous. The cracks in the facade widened 2 weeks ago. I logged into the shared email account we created for wedding vendors to check on a floral delivery. I found the inbox empty, which was strange for a wedding that was days away. Curious, I clicked on the trash folder. It was full, dozens of deleted emails. confirmations for vendor meetings, tasting sessions, and venue walkthroughs. The dates on these meetings coincided perfectly with my shifts at the hospital. I had not been at those meetings, but the emails confirmed that the couple had attended. Who went with him, I had wondered aloud in the silence of my apartment. I called Jada, my best friend and a ruthless contract lawyer, the next day. She did not hesitate. "Brooke, listen to me," Jada had said, her voice serious over the phone. "The Mercers do not do things for love. They do things for leverage. This smells like a deal, not a wedding. If they are hiding paperwork and meetings, they are positioning you. Watch your back." I wanted to believe Jada was just being cynical. I wanted to believe that Gavin, the man who brought me coffee in bed and whispered promises about our future children, was real. I told myself that the stress was making me paranoid. I told myself that he loved me. I was a fool. Standing outside the church doors, listening to the silence that followed my arrival, the pieces finally clicked into place. The deleted emails, the pressure to sign documents I was not allowed to read, the strange admin override on my work schedule. They never intended for me to walk down that aisle on time. They never intended to marry Brooke Callahan, the partner. They wanted to marry Brooke Callahan, the asset. And when I failed to show up on their schedule to sign their papers, they simply replaced me with someone who would. I looked at the woman standing next to Gavin. She was wearing the diamond earrings Evelyn had given me at the rehearsal dinner. I had been wrong about everything. They did not organize a wedding today. They organized a hostile takeover and a transfer of power, and I had almost signed my life away to them. Before I sprinted out of the hospital doors to face the humiliation at the church, I spent 10 critical minutes in the eye of the storm. The moment the code red lockdown lifted, I did not just run. I investigated. I needed to know why the universe had conspired against me. So I went to the nursing station terminal and pulled up the audit trail for the shift roster. The screen blinked back at me with a line of code that made the hair on my arms stand up. The command to add my name to the trauma rotation had not come from the central scheduling server or the chief resident's tablet. The modification had originated from a specific internal IP address assigned to the Office of Hospital Partnerships. That was the department that handled major donors and fundraising galas, not surgical rotations. I cornered Dr. Pearsley, the chief of staff, near the scrub sinks as he was tossing his mask into the biohazard bin. He would not meet my eyes. Dr. Pearsley. Why was my schedule altered from an administrative office that deals with financial donors, I asked, my voice trembling with adrenaline. He wiped his forehead, looking like a bad actor reading from a teleprompter. It was just a system error, a glitch in the autofill algorithm. Do not make a scene. Brooke. I walked away without another word. I did not believe a single syllable. I went back to the recovery bay to process the John Doe's personal effects, which was standard protocol for unidentified trauma cases before transfer. I picked up his leather wallet. It was wet and ruined, but I felt a hard lump inside the lining. I used a small pair of forceps to pull out a micro USB drive. It was tiny, black, and had a piece of white tape on the side with 2 words written in fine marker Mercer Trust. My breath hitched before I could process the name on the drive. A cold hand grabbed my wrist. I jumped. The patient was awake, his eyes wide and terrified above the oxygen mask. He pulled me down, his grip weak but desperate. "They use the hospital to force signatures," he rasped, the words bubbling up through the fluid in his lungs. Then his eyes rolled back, and the monitor steadied into the rhythm of sedation. I pocketed the drive. I had to get to my wedding, but the obstacles kept appearing like clockwork. I marched to the administration desk to sign out. "I am leaving," I announced. "The surgery is done." The administrator shook her head without looking up from her keyboard. "You cannot go. Dr. Callahan. There is no one to cover the floor." I slammed my hand on the counter and pointed at the digital whiteboard behind her. "There are 2 attending surgeons listed as on standby. Call them. They are unavailable," she stammered, her face flushing red. I looked up at the security monitor mounted in the corner of the ceiling. On the screen showing the hallway outside the operating room, a man in a dark suit was standing with his arms crossed. He was not pacing like a worried relative. He was standing guard like a sentry, ensuring I stayed inside until the clock ran out. I ignored the administrator and ran to the locker room. I threw open my locker door to grab my things. My street clothes were there, but my car keys were gone. I checked the pockets of my scrubs, the floor, the shelf. Nothing. I slammed the metal door shut and ran to the valet desk downstairs. "My car," I demanded. "The white Audi." The valet looked at his clipboard, confused. That vehicle was marked for long-term storage. "Ma'am, it was moved to the underground overflow lot on level 4. It will take, maybe 20 minutes to retrieve." The pattern was undeniable. The locked doors, the altered schedule, the missing keys, the phantom lack of staff. These were not accidents. They were speed bumps designed to slow me down just enough to make me late. They wanted me to look irresponsible. They wanted me to arrive frantic, unprofessional, and guilty. I did not scream. I did not cry. I pulled out my phone. I snapped a photo of the admin log showing the hospital partnership's IP address. I took a picture of the duty board showing the available surgeons. I took a picture of the security feed with the man in the suit. My instinct as a surgeon took over. In the trauma room, if you do not document the injury, it never happened. I was gathering my evidence before the patient my marriage was even pronounced dead. The wall of bodies blocking the church entrance was not a crowd. It was a phalanx. Evelyn Mercer stood at the center, her face composed into a mask of tragic disappointment that I knew she had practiced in the mirror. She did not look at my eyes. She looked pointedly at the dried blood on my sleeve, wrinkling her nose as if I were a piece of rotting fruit she had found in her pristine garden. "You have made Gavin a laughingstock," Evelyn hissed, her voice low and trembling with manufactured rage. "Look at you, dragging the stench of that hospital into a house of God. You do not deserve him. You never did." Before I could answer, Gavin's Aunt Martha stepped forward, her face turning a violent shade of purple. She pointed a manicured finger directly between my eyes. "Get out!" she screamed. It was a command so loud it echoed off the vaulted ceiling of the vestibule. Simultaneously, I saw a flash of movement to my left. Gavin's cousin, a 20-year-old marketing major, held his phone up, capturing the entire scene. He was not recording out of shock. He was framing the shot. I stopped fighting against the wall of people and looked around. The photographer, who should have been focused on the couple at the altar, was currently snapping rapid-fire photos of my humiliation. The guests in the pews were not gasping or whispering in confusion. They sat facing forward, calm and expectant, as if this interruption was listed in the program between the readings and the vows. They were not witnessing a tragedy, they were consuming content. My gaze drifted past the blockade to the altar. The woman standing there turned slightly. It was Talia Rowe. I recognized her immediately. She was a junior analyst at Gavin's firm, the one he had sworn was just a work friend who needed mentoring. She looked beautiful, terrified, and triumphant all at once. But what made the breath catch in my throat was not her dress. It was the jewelry. Hanging from her ears were the diamond teardrops that Evelyn had given me at the rehearsal dinner just 2 nights ago. They caught the light, mocking me with their sparkle. Gavin descended the altar steps. He did not run to me. He did not look worried about the blood on my dress or the panic in my eyes. He walked with a slow, deliberate cadence, stopping 3 feet away from me. He looked at me with the cold detachment of a stranger. "You are selfish." "Brooke," Gavin said, his voice loud enough for the first 5 rows to hear clearly. "You chose a stranger over your family. You chose the hospital over our future. Again." "Gavin, please," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to steel myself. I was locked in surgery. Someone tampered with the schedule. "Just give me 2 minutes alone with you. Please. I can explain." "It is too late for explanations," he replied, smoothing the lapel of his tuxedo. You made your choice when you did not show up. You left me standing here. Talia stepped up because she understands what loyalty means. He gestured vaguely toward a small table set up near the altar, usually reserved for the marriage license, but the thick envelope resting on the velvet cloth was not a marriage license. I had seen enough contracts to recognize the binding tape. The title page was visible from where I stood, Asset Consolidation Addendum, and right next to the signature line, a bright yellow sticky note flag was waving at me. The realization hit me harder than the sight of the other woman. This was the second layer of the trap. They had orchestrated the delay not just to humiliate me, but to induce panic. They wanted me to burst in, breathless and desperate, and sign that document without reading it just to salvage the wedding. If I arrived late, I would sign to beg for forgiveness. If I arrived too late like I just had, they simply replaced the signatory with Talia. I looked at Gavin, really looked at him, for the first time in years. I saw the greed behind his eyes. I saw the relief that he no longer had to pretend to care about my career. I straightened my spine. I brushed a speck of dust off my ruined dress. I did not cry. I refused to give them that footage. I will leave, I said, my voice cutting through the silence of the church like a scalpel, but I am not leaving empty-handed. I turned my back on the altar, on the fake tears of his mother, and on the man who had just tried to monetize my life. I walked back out into the sunlight, my hand clutching the USB drive in my pocket. They thought they had discarded me. They had no idea they had just armed me. I walked into my apartment and peeled the ruined wedding dress off my body like a layer of dead skin. I did not hang it up. I kicked it into the corner of the bedroom and pulled on a pair of sweatpants and a hoodie. My hands were steady now. The adrenaline of the trauma bay had faded, replaced by the cold, clinical focus I used when dissecting a complex tumor. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I logged into the portal for my medical patent royalties. My heart stopped for a second, then started beating with a slow, heavy thud. A request to change my direct deposit information had been submitted 10 days ago. I opened my email and went straight to the trash folder. There it was, a confirmation email from a company called North Pine Royalties. It looked legitimate on the surface, formatted with professional logos and legal disclaimers, but I had never heard of them. The email stated that my quarterly payments would now be routed through them as a third-party manager. I picked up my phone and dialed the bank's fraud department. I am looking at my security settings. I told the representative, my voice flat. There is a phone number listed for two-factor authentication that is not mine. Let me verify that for you. Dr. Callahan, the operator said. I see a secondary number ending in 45 was added 2 weeks ago. It was authorized via a voice verification PIN. I hung up without arguing. Gavin knew my PIN. He had helped me set it up. I dug deeper into the cloud storage connected to our shared home network. Buried in a subfolder labeled Tax Prep, I found a scanned document. It was a limited power of attorney. At the bottom of the page, my signature was scrawled in blue ink. It looked perfect. It looked exactly like the way I signed prescriptions. But I knew I had never seen this document in my life. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The envelope at the church labeled Asset Consolidation was not just about merging our bank accounts. They were planning to use the wedding to legitimize this theft. If I had signed that document at the altar in a panic, I would have retroactively authorized every fraudulent move they had made in the last month. They were not just stealing my money. They were setting me up to take the fall for whatever liability North Pine Royalties was carrying. My doorbell rang. It was Jada. She walked in, took one look at my face, and poured 2 glasses of wine. She sat next to me and read the power of attorney document on my screen. Brooke, Jada said, her voice low and dangerous. This is not a marriage. This is a heist. They want to turn you into an out-of-control woman so you sign anything just to get him back. If you react with anger, they win. They will say you are unstable. I am not going to react with anger, I said, closing the laptop lid. I am going to react with strategy. Do not file the fraud report yet, Jada advised, her lawyer brain kicking into high gear. If you file now, they will cover their tracks. Let them think you are just a heartbroken girl crying in her apartment. Let them think the plan worked. I nodded. I picked up my phone and typed a text to Gavin. I forced myself to use words that tasted like ash in my mouth. I am sorry. Please, just let me speak to you properly. I can fix this. I took a screenshot of the text immediately. Evidence that I was trying to reconcile. Evidence that I was the rational one, despite the chaos. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the micro USB drive I had taken from the patient in the ER. I plugged it into my laptop. The drive popped up on my desktop. I opened it, expecting financial spreadsheets or maybe illicit photos. Instead, I found a folder structure that made my blood run cold. The main folder was titled Morrogate Mercer Pipeline, Vendors. I clicked it open. There, listed in plain text files, were the internal routing numbers for my hospital, Morrogate Emergency and Surgical Center, and next to them were transfer logs moving hundreds of thousands of dollars into accounts managed by the Mercer Foundation. The patient in the ER had whispered that they were using the hospital. He was right. My fiancé and his family were not just stealing from me, they were laundering money through the very place where I saved lives. And they had tried to marry me to make sure the one person who could catch them was legally bound to keep their secrets. I bypassed the standard reporting system entirely. If I had filed a formal complaint through the hospital portal, the notification would have gone straight to the administration board, the very people I suspected were involved. Instead, I sent an encrypted message to Elliot Crane, the chief compliance officer at Morrogate, asking for a meeting under the whistleblower protection protocol. We met in the basement archive room at 6 a.m, surrounded by boxes of paper records that smelled of dust and old secrets. Elliot looked tired. He had his laptop open on a stack of files, the screen casting a blue glow on his glasses. I pulled the raw server data like you asked, Elliot said, keeping his voice low. Brooke, the command that locked you in the operating room, it bypassed the safety protocols. It wasn't a glitch. It was a manual override. Who authorized it, I asked. That is the problem, Elliot replied, turning the screen toward me. The user ID is masked. Whoever did this has clearance levels higher than mine. We are talking about board-level access. The door to the archive room opened, and Jada slipped in. She was not alone. Behind her walked a man in a gray tactical jacket carrying a heavy equipment case. This is Miles Kidder, Jada said, closing the door softly. He is a forensic investigator for contract fraud. We are not calling the police yet. The police need a warrant. Miles just needs a Wi-Fi connection. Miles did not waste time with pleasantries. He plugged a drive into Elliot's laptop and started typing. Lines of code scrolled down the screen faster than I could read. You said the system was down for 40 minutes, Miles asked without looking up. Yes, I answered. Well, the logs show a scrub, Miles said, pointing to a blank gap in the timeline, between 12:30 and 12:47. 17 minutes of security footage and door access logs were deleted, permanently. Someone wanted to make sure there was no record of who was standing outside that operating room. Can you recover it? Elliot asked. No, Miles said. But I can tell you where the deletion command came from. It came from the same external server that sent this. He pulled up the digital file of the forged power of attorney I had found on my home network. He zoomed in on the invisible yellow tracking dots that most color laser printers leave on documents. Every printer has a fingerprint, Miles explained. This document wasn't scanned at a Kinko's. It was printed and scanned at the main office of the Mercer Foundation. The timestamp is 3 days ago. The room went silent. The Mercer Foundation was the charitable arm of Gavin's family empire. They were the ones who donated the new pediatric wing to the hospital last year. And we have a name for your John Doe, Elliot said, sliding a printed sheet across the table. His fingerprints came back from the database. His name is Warren Sloan. I stared at the photo. It was the man I had operated on. Warren Sloan is a forensic accountant, Jada said, her eyes widening as she connected the dots. He specializes in auditing nonprofits for money laundering. He was investigating the Mercer Foundation. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket. We plugged it into the isolated sandbox environment on Miles's computer. A text file opened up, written by Warren just hours before his accident. They know I found the leak. If anything happens to me, check the brake lines. They staged the accident to force my silence. If I die, this file is the alarm. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was a hit, I whispered, the realization making me feel sick. Gavin, or his family. They tried to kill Warren Sloan because he found out they were washing money through the hospital charity fund. And they used me to save him just enough to keep him alive but incapacitated. And they timed it to ruin your wedding so you would be desperate enough to sign the liability waiver. Jada finished, her voice shaking with rage. They kill two birds with one stone. They silence the auditor and they trap the doctor who saved him into a marriage that binds her to their debt. Elliot looked at me. We have enough to go to the FBI. Brooke. Not yet, I said, standing up. The fear was gone. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling in my chest. If we go to the FBI now, they will lawyer up and destroy the evidence. They think I am just a heartbroken bride. They think I am weak. What are you going to do? Miles asked. I am going to let them think they won, I said. I do not need them to apologize. I need them to sign their own confession. We spent the next 3 hours peeling back the layers of the Mercer family's deception, and what we found was not just a betrayal of the heart, but a coordinated corporate maneuver. Jada was the first to find the link between the new bride and the money. She turned her laptop screen toward me, tapping a finger on a personnel file she had dug up from a cached LinkedIn profile. Talia Rowe didn't just meet Gavin at the water cooler, Jada said, her voice hard. She was an account manager at North Pine Royalties for exactly 6 months before she resigned last week. Brooke. She was the one processing your royalty diversion request. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Talia wasn't a random replacement. She was the inside man. I went back to the USB drive Warren Sloan had given me. I opened an email chain dated 2 months ago. The subject line was Pipeline Commission. It was from Gavin to an anonymous address. The text read, "If I can get Brooke into the liability package by the wedding date, I expect the full 10% commission from the Mercer Pipeline project. She has the assets to absorb the hit." He sold me, I whispered, staring at the screen. He traded my financial future for a commission check. Elliot Crane looked up from his own screen. His face was pale. I found the admin account that changed your schedule. I had to go through 3 layers of encryption, but the user ID belongs to Conrad Mercer, Gavin's uncle. I said, "He sits on the hospital board of directors. He has emergency override privileges." Elliot confirmed. "He put you in that OR. He knew exactly when the trauma was coming in." My phone buzzed against the table. I glanced at it. A video titled "Selfish Dr. Ruins." Her own wedding was trending on social media. It showed a heavily edited clip of me storming into the church, looking deranged and bloody, while Evelyn looked like a saint. The comments were vicious. I turned the phone face down. Let them talk. Their overconfidence was my only advantage. We needed to talk to Warren. I went up to the ICU, slipping past the nurses who knew me. Warren was awake, though weak. When I told him we had the drive and knew about the Mercer pipeline, he nodded slowly. "It is federal fraud," Warren rasped, his voice barely audible. "They are funneling grant money meant for equipment into offshore accounts. I was going to the FBI. I agreed to meet Gavin to give him one chance to explain." I froze. "You met Gavin today before the accident," he said. "Meet me at the intersection near the old warehouse," Warren said, breathing heavily. He gave me a token of good faith. I reached into the plastic bag holding Warren's personal effects and pulled out the gold wedding band I had found in his pocket during surgery. I looked at the inscription inside. It didn't say Warren. It said, Gavin and Brooke. "It is Gavin's ring," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "He gave it to you as collateral to buy time. Then, the car hit me." Warren wheezed. From behind. Fast. Miles walked into the room, holding his tablet like a weapon. I pulled the traffic cam footage from that intersection. The car that hit Warren was a black sedan. It fled the scene, but I got the plate. It was a rental. Let me guess. Jada said. Gavin rented it. Better. Miles said. It was rented by a company called Row Event Logistics. Talia's family. I realized. The picture was complete, and it was monstrous. Gavin had lured Warren to that intersection with the promise of a meeting. He gave him the ring to keep him quiet for a few minutes. Then, someone from Talia's side of the conspiracy ran Warren down. They timed the crash perfectly to send a level 1 trauma to my hospital right when Conrad Mercer changed my schedule. They didn't just take advantage of a bad day. They created a murder attempt to trap me. I looked at the copy of the asset consolidation addendum that Miles had scanned from the church photos. I read the fine print on page 4, the part I would have missed if I had signed in a hurry. It is not a consolidation of assets, I said, looking up at my team. This clause here. It assigns full personal liability for all outstanding debts of the Mercer Foundation to the signatory. They have millions of dollars in debt from the embezzlement. They wanted me to marry Gavin so I would legally inherit the bill. I stood up. The sadness was gone. All that was left was the cold, precise focus of a surgeon preparing to cut out a cancer. I am not going to hide. I said, I am going to finish this. But first, I need Gavin to think he has won. I picked up my phone and typed the message Jada had dictated to me, my fingers moving mechanically over the glass. I stripped every ounce of pride from my words, crafting the image of a defeated woman who just wanted the nightmare to end. I just want peace. I wrote, I will sign the papers if you guarantee that I am not responsible for any debt. I cannot handle the stress anymore. The response came through less than 30 seconds later. The bubbles appeared and vanished as he typed, then retyped. Finally, a message popped up. I knew you would be reasonable. Come to the firm's office at the Crestfall building. We can put this behind us. I showed the screen to Jada. She smirked, but her eyes were cold. She slid a document across my kitchen island. It looked identical to the settlement agreement Gavin's lawyers had sent over an hour ago, with the same font, the same headers, and the same dense legal jargon, but page 3 was different. I kept the language complex so they will skim it. Jada explained, tapping the paper with her pen. It looks like a standard indemnity clause, but I changed the liability assignment. By signing this, Gavin and the Mercer Foundation accept full responsibility for any and all financial obligations related to North Pine royalties and the patent accounts. It clears you completely. And if he reads it, I asked. He won't. Jada said, he thinks he is the smartest person in the room, and he thinks you are stupid. I dressed in a simple gray suit, nothing like the fierce armor I wanted to wear. I needed to look small. Under the silk blouse, Miles taped a tiny recording device to my collarbone. The frequency is encrypted, Miles told me as he adjusted the tape. Elliot and I will be in the van downstairs. We have federal agents on standby around the block. We just need the verbal confirmation to seal the intent to defraud. I walked into the conference room on the 42nd floor of the Crestfall building. The air conditioning was set to freezing. Gavin sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking relaxed and magnanimous. To my surprise, Talia was there too. She was sitting to his right, wearing a cream blazer, looking at me with a mixture of pity and smug superiority. Brooke, Gavin said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. I am glad you came to your senses. We do not want to fight you. We just want to protect the assets. I do not care about the assets, I said. keeping my voice soft and trembling. I just want my name off the risk list. I saw the emails. Gavin. I know about the debt. Talia scoffed, checking her watch. It doesn't matter what you saw. Just sign the papers so everything is clean. We have a timeline to meet. Her slip was subtle, but it was there. She admitted there was something to clean. Gavin shot her a warning look, then slid a heavy fountain pen across the polished wood toward me. Next to it was the document Jada and I had swapped into the folder while his assistant was getting coffee. It is just a formality, babe, Gavin said, his voice dripping with that fake sweetness that used to make me melt. Standard protection for both of us. I picked up the pen. The metal was cold against my fingers. I hesitated, letting the nib hover over the signature line. I looked up, meeting Gavin's eyes directly. Gavin, I said, making sure I spoke clearly for the microphone. Before I sign, I need you to answer me. Do you confirm that I have absolutely no involvement with North Pine royalties or the offshore accounts? This signature means I am out, right? Gavin smiled, the smile of a predator who sees the trap closing on the mouse. Yes. Brooke, he said, his voice distinct and recorded forever. I confirm it. You are not involved. North Pine is all me. I will handle everything. Just sign. I lowered my eyes. Okay. I pressed the pen to the paper. But I did not use my standard signature. I added a small, almost invisible loop to the tail of the last letter, a mark Jada and I had agreed upon. It was a forensic tag. If they tried to swap this page later for the original fraudulent version, the lack of that loop would prove the switch. I signed my name. I pushed the document back to him. Gavin signed it immediately, not even glancing at the text, his arrogance blinding him to the fact that he had just assumed millions of dollars in fraudulent debt. As soon as the ink dried, the atmosphere in the room shifted. I sat up straighter. The trembling in my hands vanished. I stood up, smoothing down my jacket, and looked at the two of them. The fear was gone from my face, replaced by a look of absolute calm. Thank you, I said, my voice dropping an octave to its natural, commanding tone. You just signed the only thing you will not be able to explain to the federal prosecutors. Gavin's smile faltered. What did you say? I replied, walking toward the door, that you should probably call your lawyer, but not the one on your payroll. You are going to need a criminal defense attorney. The doors to the conference room burst open, but it was not the waiter with more coffee. It was a team of federal agents in windbreakers emblazoned with the Bureau's initials. At the same moment, across town, another team was breaching the glass doors of the Mercer Foundation. I watched the live feed on Miles's tablet as they intercepted Conrad Mercer trying to get into the executive elevator. He looked small and gray as they cuffed him, his board member immunity evaporating instantly. Gavin scrambled back from the table, his face draining of color. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She did this, Gavin screamed, spit flying from his mouth. She violated HIPAA. She used her access to hospital records to target us. That is illegal search. You cannot use that. Elliot Crane stepped out from behind the agents, holding a tablet like a shield. Actually, Mr. Mercer, Elliot said calmly. Dr. Callahan never performed a manual search. Our security protocols flagged your uncle's unauthorized admin override automatically. The system alerted her. She did not hunt for your secrets. You handed them to her when you broke into our network. Talia, realizing the ship was sinking, tried to pivot. She turned to the lead agent, her voice high and breathless. I was just an employee, she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. I did not know about the fraud. I can testify. I can help you if we make a deal. Miles Kidder stepped forward then, dropping a file on the table with a heavy thud. I do not think you are in a position to negotiate. Ms. Rowe, Miles said. We found the rental agreement for the black sedan that ran Warren Sloan off the road. It was rented under your corporate credit card. That moves you from bystander to accomplice in attempted vehicular manslaughter. Talia's face went blank. She slumped into the chair, the arrogance of the new bride gone, replaced by the terror of a criminal caught red-handed. The Mercers, however, were not done fighting. Within an hour, a smear campaign hit the internet. Articles appeared on gossip sites with headlines claiming I was a heartless surgeon who abandoned her groom for greed. They claimed I was cold, unfeeling, and had left Gavin at the altar to pursue a higher salary. I did not engage in a comment war. I simply authorized the hospital public relations team to release a single sterile statement. Morrogate Medical Center is currently cooperating with federal authorities regarding an unauthorized external breach of our surgical scheduling system. We take the safety of our staff and the integrity of our operations seriously. It was vague enough to be legal, but specific enough to kill the rumor that I was the villain. Then came the final nail. Warren Sloan gave his official statement from his hospital bed. He confirmed that Gavin had met him minutes before the crash to beg him to delete the audit files. He explained that the wedding ring found in his pocket was not a gift, it was collateral. Gavin had given it to him as a down payment, a promise of cash to come if he stayed quiet for just 24 hours. By the afternoon, Gavin was suspended from his firm, his personal accounts, and the accounts of the foundation were frozen. My phone rang. It was Evelyn. "Brooke, please," she sobbed, the Ice Queen melting into hysteria. "Think about what you are doing. We are family. You are going to be my daughter. You can stop this. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. I cannot do that." "Evelyn," I said, my voice steady. "Have you no heart?" she wailed. "After everything we did for you, I used to love this family," I replied. "But now I do not have love. I just have evidence." I hung up. Minutes later, Miles sent me a screenshot. He had intercepted a text message Talia sent to a crisis management firm right before her arrest. It read, "Push the narrative that the bride is unstable. Use the abandoned groom angle. We need public sympathy before the audit hits." It was the final piece of the puzzle. They had planned the media spin before the wedding even started. But as I looked at the wall of evidence we had built, I realized something even darker. They did not just want my patent money. They wanted my reputation. The Mercer Foundation was dirty money. They needed a clean, respected face, a trauma surgeon who saves lives to front their charity and wash their reputation. They wanted to marry me so my integrity would cover their crimes. I stood up and grabbed my coat. I was done hiding in conference rooms. "Where are you going?" Jada asked. "To the press?" I said. "They wanted a show. I am going to give them a finale they cannot spin." I walked into the special hearing of the hospital board and federal representatives carrying nothing but a slim briefcase. The room was sterile, lit by harsh fluorescent strips that left no shadows for anyone to hide in. On one side of the mahogany table sat the hospital administration, looking pale and terrified. On the other side sat Gavin, his lawyer, and a weeping Evelyn Mercer. They looked up as I entered, expecting a broken woman. Instead, they saw a surgeon ready to make the final incision. I placed 3 items on the table: a USB drive, a printed log of the system overrides, and the settlement agreement Gavin had signed just hours ago. Gavin's lawyer stood up immediately, adjusting his tie with nervous hands. "Dr. Callahan is clearly unstable," the lawyer announced, gesturing vaguely at me. "She was abandoned at the altar. She is lashing out with fabricated conspiracy theories to damage my client's reputation. This is a tragic case of a mental breakdown." I did not argue. I simply pressed play on the small audio recorder I had placed next to the microphone. Gavin's voice filled the room, clear and undeniable. "Yes. Brooke, I confirm it. You are not involved. North Pine is all me. I will handle everything." The lawyer froze. Gavin's face turned the color of ash. "That recording," I said, my voice steady and cold, "confirms that Gavin Mercer knowingly accepted full liability for the fraudulent accounts at North Pine Royalties. He admitted it was his operation. I tapped the stack of papers. And here is the timeline. At midnight, Conrad Mercer altered my schedule using an admin override. At 12:15, the operating room was locked down manually for 40 minutes. At 2 o'clock, my car keys vanished. At 3:17, I was presented with a debt consolidation form at the altar. This was not a wedding. It was a planned extraction of assets. The federal agent at the head of the table nodded to Miles, who projected a new image onto the wall. It was the traffic camera footage of the black sedan slamming into Warren Sloane's car. "We have testimony from Mr. Sloane," the agent stated. "He confirms the accident was staged to silence him, and we have the rental agreement for the vehicle used in the assault. It was paid for by Rowe Event Logistics, a subsidiary of the Mercer Pipeline." Evelyn Mercer stood up, her hands trembling as she clutched her pearl necklace. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of panic, not remorse. "You cannot do this," she wailed. "We are the benefactors of this hospital. We are good people, Brooke. How could you?" The agent did not blink. He read from a sheet of paper: Evelyn Mercer, Conrad Mercer, and Gavin Mercer. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of a federal investigation." The room erupted into chaos as officers moved in. Gavin collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Brooke, please," he stammered. Can we just talk for a second? Just you and me." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No love, no hate. Just the indifference one feels for a stranger. "There is no talking. Gavin," I said, "you have two choices. You can go to prison for 20 years for the hit on Warren and the fraud. Or you can sign a full confession right now, implicating the entire Mercer Pipeline network, and beg for a plea deal." He looked at his mother being handcuffed. He looked at the federal agents. Then he looked at the pen I slid across the table. It was the same pen he had tried to make me use to sign away my life. With a shaking hand, Gavin signed. In that moment, the realization hit him. He had spent months trying to trap me, thinking I was the prey. He never realized that by bringing me into his world, he had invited the hunter. I stood up and addressed the board one last time. "I was late to my wedding because I was saving a human life," I said, my voice ringing in the silence. "They were on time because they were busy killing the truth." I turned and walked out of the double doors. I did not look back as they led Gavin away in handcuffs. I walked out of the hospital and into the cool air of the early morning. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I was not a bride. I was not a wife. I was Dr. Brooke Callahan. I had my name. I had my assets. And for the first time in 4 years, I had a silence that belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to Victoria Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.